Assalamu alaikum and welcome to Perspective. The KULBHUSHAN JADHAV case, the provisional order that's come out as far as the ICJ is concerned, what is the reality and what is just propaganda? What do we do from this point on as far as Pakistan is concerned? How do we build our case? What is the media doing? How is it labeling Pakistan? How is it playing it up? But let's look at the reality of it. I have with me General Talat Masood Saab, who's a defense analyst. Thank you for joining me today. Dr. Yunus Khan Saab, who's a political analyst. Thank you for giving us your time. And Yasser Lateef Hamdani Saab, who's our legal expert today. Thank you for joining us today. Talat Saab, in your opinion, it's certainly, we've seen the verdict in the KULBHUSHAN JADHAV case. We've seen what the ICJ had to say. It's certainly not the final order. It's a provisional order. How do you look at it? How do you look at, they've just said that, the execution of Commander Yadav should be stayed, which wasn't, don't you think that that was prima facie was going to happen anyway? How do you look at it?
Well, I was not surprised at all. Actually, I was expecting that this is what would happen because our top lawyers also had mentioned that.
Right.
That, whenever they would go to a court like this, for that matter, even a country court,
right.
They will always give and say that you have to wait. And so I think there was nothing so unusual about what had happened. And probably our expectations were, firstly, the only thing we could have possibly done was to contest whether it was ICJ's jurisdiction or not. But that also would have been a very weak case because, as you know, we are a party to the convention, Geneva Convention.
Exactly.
So that would have also contradicted. But at the most, we could have just said that this does not fall in that category and taken that plea. But at the same time, I don't think in any circumstances the judgment would have been anything other than this. And it is not a prejudice judgment as I see it.
Right.
It is like, for instance, as I said earlier, any judge would say that, well, you wait till you have further evidence.
Right, because otherwise, the whole proceedings would be redundant.
Absolutely.
If the execution itself was not stayed.
I think the whole thing is being politically actually ruined here in Pakistan, and the media has also not played a very helpful role.
Right.
And of course, the Indian media has gone berserk, and they have thought that they have probably won another war against Pakistan. And the type of jubilation that is being shown in India shows the level of immaturity. In fact, let me tell you something. Yesterday I was invited by many Indian TVs, but I chose only one because I had to attend many in Pakistan. But I thought I'll give a Pakistani perspective on the Indian TV.
Right.
And I was so shocked because there were, I think, 5 Indians and I was the 6th one Pakistani. And the anchor wouldn't let me speak. And all she wanted to tell me was to give me a dressing down. And I said, what are you giving me a dressing down for? You have invited me, behave like a mature country.
Right, let me say what I have to say.
And I'm telling you, honestly, I'm telling you, I was so disappointed because I think India is also going berserk. And of course, Pakistani media has also played not a very helpful role, in fact, somewhat a negative role. They have not understood the substance of the case. They have not understood the judgment properly. Their expectations were completely wild. And of course, the opposition parties are making haywire.
Right, let's talk about all of that and let me come back to you. In your opinion, Yunus Saab, in your opinion, how do you see it? I mean, clearly, like Talat Saab is saying, it's obvious that, India is playing it up. India is looking at it as a victory from their side, which it may be a gross misrepresentation of whatever has happened. But, to give the devil its due, they should, because, it's patriotism for them. It's, playing it up is what they should do in the circumstances. But what about in Pakistan? How should we be looking at it? Certainly not in the way that it's being played up around, don't you think?
I'll agree with you to a certain extent that India has successfully tricked us. In the case, the General Saab's opinion is quite valid. The judgment is not so surprising for us as far as ICJ is concerned. And I think that we have also thinking negatively about the jurisdiction I also agree on the jurisdiction of ICJ on the basis of the additional protocol to the Vienna Convention.
Right, right.
We could have opt out of it, but we did not. So as far as we have ratified it, India has actually played a tactic which we can analyze from the situation that they wanted consular access. So the Vienna Convention put very much stress on the consular assistance. We must consider that point, that by not giving them consular assistance, we have created a situation which was earlier created by the United States in the La Grande case. If you refer to that La Grande precedent, you would find that the Germans who were spying and they were responsible and charged with the espionage in the United States, they were not provided with the notification and the consular access. So the ICJ decided against them. That was the exact replica of our case which is happening here, because we are going to execute Kulbhushan because of the judgment of the domestic court. So we are bound by our own laws initially. We are also doing the same thing, but in that case even United States executed the La Grande brothers.
Because they decided not to, they decided not to go with the judgment that the ICJ had given.
They decided not to go. But the thing is, can we as a mature nation, as a part of the United Nations Chartered members, can we go for something so irresponsible? Because we have to fight it in a legal manner.
Even though legally we may do that.
So in Pakistan, sometimes you see even the legal issues are politicized, and sometimes people want to take advantage of the situation, and they don't look at the precedent. And in international law, we have the bilateral relation with India. What we failed was to put India into a scenario wherein we can tell them that if you refer to the Agra summit, if you refer even back to the Simla agreement, you will find that we have to discuss this bilaterally. And we have to go for the prisoner of war for bilateral discussion. How can you take it to the ICJ? ICJ has no jurisdiction. But by not providing the consular assistance, we have created a dispute. And that dispute, which India says that it is a matter of interpretation, which actually it is not. But somehow, I think we have been tricked as far as present scenario is concerned. We must be cautious from now on.
Yasser, in your opinion, do you think it's about that? It's about the fact that, of course, we didn't, the issue is about consular assistance, which the Vienna Convention is very clear on, and therefore it is about the fact that whether jurisdiction, they do assume jurisdiction, and they have said that we should, whether to decide or not whether we should have provided consular assistance or not, the execution has been stayed. In your opinion, do you think that it's about India tricking us, or it's about something else altogether?
Well, I think I concur with what Yunus Saab was saying and what General Saab was saying. It was not a surprising judgment.
And it's not really a judgment anyway.
It's not a judgment, it's an order. It's a provisional measures order. And that's very important to make that distinction. It's not a judgment. There's no final verdict that has come down. Even the jurisdiction that has been assumed is a prima facie jurisdiction. It's not it's still open to question whether ICJ has jurisdiction or not, though I think that ICJ will ultimately decide that it has jurisdiction. And the reason for that is that we are part of this multilateral convention called the Vienna Convention of 1963, which is on consular access. Now, that, as far as that is concerned, and when you compare it with the 2008 agreement, and this was our argument, and we had no better argument in this, that 2008 there's a bilateral treaty between Pakistan and India in which spies have been exempted from consular access. Now, the problem, unfortunately, is that international law works in a way where bilateralism is trumped by multilateralism. Where there's a convention that you've entered into, a bilateral treaty can only expand the scope of that treaty or that convention, but it cannot narrow it down. And that is precisely what happened here. So as far as jurisdiction question is concerned, I think you could have argued anything you wanted, but ultimately ICJ would have assumed jurisdiction. Our other...
so you think all these allegations about us having botched it up and not having done it right in the right way, not having hired the right person, are just a lot of hogwash?
I think entirely hogwash. I mean, there is no question. First of all, Khawar Qureshi QC is an extremely respected lawyer from England. He's Middle Temple in Cantab. He has 20 or 25, 27 years of experience.
Right.
He was the youngest lawyer at the ICJ in the Bosnia case. So he's an extremely respected and extremely competent lawyer. I don't think we could have found a better lawyer than him. Now, as far as watching it up is concerned, I think what he argued, and that's where I find myself disagreeing with the ICJ position,
right,
is because he argued very clearly and very ably. He distinguished the Legrand case and the Avena case, and he showed that there was no urgency.
Right.
This was the centerpiece of his argument, the plank of his argument was that there is no urgency and India has improperly invoked the jurisdiction of the ICJ. Unfortunately, for whatever reason, the ICJ did not entertain that argument, but that doesn't mean that it wasn't a good argument or that there was anything lacking in the way he had argued it. So I think that is very clear. But the bigger question, we should look at it from a bigger perspective, sort of a larger perspective. India has been opposed to multilateralism when dealing with Pakistan.
Right.
Right? Now, India went to the ICJ. That itself is a huge victory for us because it opens up a door. Some people are saying that perhaps it was a bad idea to go to the ICJ to defend this.
Right.
That is absolutely ridiculous. What you would have done is you would have squandered the one silver lining that this thing had, and that was that ICJ's jurisdiction has now been accepted by India, and tomorrow if we go there, then if they back out, then they look bad.
And this might be of a lot of assistance to us as far as the Kashmir issue
Absolutely,
is
Kashmir issue, and there are many other issues.
Right.
I think there are several such issues that would come up in the future, and it's good even in terms of from a human rights perspective to have ICJ sitting in ultimate court of appeal, as it were, is a good thing for international jurisprudence. So as far as the case is concerned, Pakistan hasn't lost it.
Right, exactly.
There's going to be an objection stage, and then there's going to be a proper case.
Right, and Yasser, I want to ask this again from a lawyer's point of view, and we've just been through this earlier also, but isn't this a fait accompli as far as the order is concerned? In any case, in any given case where you're arguing whether or not a certain thing should have happened, the court has to stay. I mean, this was something the court had to do. Otherwise, it was every measure that they would have then taken would have been redundant.
Absolutely,
so
and this happens every time. For example, in sort of criminal law, when there is a murder appeal that comes up, somebody has been convicted, their conviction is stayed. And then there's a process of appeal, and then there's a decision
because
taken.
obviously if you do the conviction, then there's no point to the case.
Absolutely,
anyway.
it would make it redundant completely.
Right.
It would make the entire thing infructuous if. Infructuous is a very sort of subcontinental term. Infructuous means the case would have no value anymore.
Right.
So this was going to happen. I'm a little surprised by some of the allegations that have come out of the opposition parties, and I can understand that it is politics.
Right.
But
there has to be some responsibility
exactly.
to
let's
politics.
Not play
also.
politics on the country. Because saying I was looking at some of the statements from some of the opposition leaders, and they're connecting Sajjan Jindal's visit, which is horrible. I mean, how are you going to make that connection? How are you going to question the patriotism of the elected Prime Minister of the country like this? And
based on a meeting. Let me come back to you. I want to take General Saab's opinion on that. General Saab, the audacity of the media also, and I would say the political parties, the certain political opposition parties also, like Yasser is saying, in questioning the very patriotism of a country's elected Prime Minister based on a meeting, an isolated meeting that he had with a businessman from India, and associating it with this judgment. What does it say to you?
Well, it shows their frivolous politics. It shows also how base they can go in order to demean the Prime Minister or their opponent, political opponent. And honestly, I'm telling you, because I'm not in politics in that sense, but I really don't understand the immaturity of our politics. Not only that it is immature, sometimes it can be very mean. And you know, there are certain limits of decorum and decency which have to be sort of followed.
Right.
And you cannot go below that. And what do they mean by saying that the Prime Minister is unpatriotic? Who are you to give such judgments? And here it has become extremely easy to say that, you know, you are not patriotic, or you are you
not
know, because,
honest.
just because you have a different opinion,
Right.
or you think you need to settle matters with another country in a different way, so you think that you sort of apportion blame on them in such a rash way. So I think it is highly irresponsible, and it creates a quality of politics which is unbecoming of a country like Pakistan.
Right.
I mean, I would have thought that by now our politics should have matured, and they have a huge responsibility. And one of the reasons why I think all this is happening is that they are not taking politics seriously, and they are not going to the parliament.
Right.
They are not attending and addressing the real national issues, and they are getting involved in personalized
mudslinging and allegations being thrown
and
around.
all personal politics. And personal politics could be very, very damaging. And that is taking away from major national issues. You have a very major issue with India. You have a very major issue with Afghanistan. I seldom find them talking about that.
Right.
But you know, they would catch something like this and then dwell on it for months and months and fritter away their energy, and also deflect the attention of the people of Pakistan towards
Right,
it.
that's what I want to discuss particularly. Do you think that it's about the fact that, you know, of course we as a country, we don't have, you know, we have a largely uneducated population. Do you think it presumes that the electoral school is going to accept this kind of mudslinging, this kind of allegations? Certainly we're very into the election. This is the election year now, you know, it started. And do you think it's because of that this kind of mudslinging is happening? And do you think that they think that it's easier to fool people who are not educated and therefore, you know, give a bad name to PMLN or to the Prime Minister? Yunus Sahab, in your opinion?
Yeah, I'll just take this one very quickly. Yeah. I have a feeling that it's just the opposite. The people of Pakistan, whether they are poor or they are middle class, they are far more sensible and intelligent than what one would think.
I agree.
And they are far more mature than our leaders.
Right.
And I really want to say this with all sincerity. My own opinion is that the leaders today are leading the country to a very wrong path. But the people of Pakistan are very sensible, and they are the ones who are holding this country.
Right, I agree with you. I couldn't agree more. But Yunus Sahab, but I think that, you know, it is a perception, and it is a false perception. But it seems to be, you know, this sort of mudslinging and this sort of propaganda seems to stem from that, no?
Actually, I'll not take it that way. I think the criticism, even if it is a political criticism, it has its own creativity and its own merits also.
Well,
but the thing, we have to be responsible. Once it is the international relations, and particularly when we are dealing with the affairs which already General Sahab has mentioned, that Afghanistan and India, we have to be very careful, because we are dealing with the people who are even capable and so open about their terrorists to be defended in the ICJ. We can just, I don't know why we are criticizing ourselves. Instead of just talking about the India, which has such a staunch purpose that it is going into the ICJ and defending their terrorist, which has confessed to his own doings, who has sabotaged the things, who has been involved in Balochistan, who has been giving the terrorist financing to the people. So I don't know why we are used to self-criticism and why we are so pessimist about the things, because even if we see in International Court of Justice, there are many precedents in which they would not interfere in the judgment. And I would little bit differ with my fellow that it is not a criminal appeal court. So they are not going to set aside. They could have been going to International Criminal Court. So I think this is just based on the convention's interpretation, and that dispute cannot lead to the interference with the Pakistani judgment. But even if it happens, we must be very much responsible in dealing with our international relations with India. As you have referred, the Prime Minister, he is also the Foreign Minister. He has all the right to deal with the diplomatic relations with any country. So even if he is meeting personally with someone or even diplomatically, he has all the rights to steer the wheel of the diplomacy. So we should have some faith and trust in the integrity of our leadership, and we should not be jumping to the conclusion, because everywhere you would see that people are jumping to the conclusions.
Right, and before I go into the technicality a little bit with Yasser, but in your opinion, you know, it's just by virtue of being a Prime Minister and not, you know, of course he's the leader of the PMLN, which is a political party, but you know, that changes when he gets elected and becomes the Prime Minister of the country. So by virtue of that portfolio, definitely, you know, you need to trust him, like you're saying, with your foreign affairs, with your country, because he's the chief executive of the country at that point, and he's leading the nation. So and you know, of course, there is criticism, and there should be criticism, and that's what the tenets of democracy are based upon. But there is also a certain something called patriotism, which I don't you agree that there doesn't seem to be?
I think the media's role is very relevant in that, because the people's opinion are framed by the media today. So if we keep on slinging mud on our own issues and our own leadership, it would be very hard for us to contest the things which are on international forums. So whenever the international forums are involved, the diplomatic relations are involved, we must be very watchful, very responsible, and especially India. India has a history of terrorism. It is involved in state terrorism in Kashmir. What is happening in Kashmir? ICJ has just a decade ago, it has rejected our application to bring the Kashmir dispute into the jurisdiction of the ICJ. So I think India has a pattern of a tendency of choosing between multilateralism and the bilateralism. When it suits them, they opt for the thing. So when they opt for the bilateralism, it is suitable for them. So I think we should be very cautious with dealing with them. The statement of Ajit Agarwal and the statement of Modi in Bangladesh, everywhere you will find that they are totally aggressive. They are against Pakistan. They are actually lodging a war against Pakistan. So the terrorism financed by the India should be considered, and we have to be very watchful, because we cannot demoralize our law enforcement agencies. We should not demoralize our military and our military forces. We should support them, either it is legally, politically, or democratically.
Right, definitely. Yasser, you know, before we go into the media side of it, in your opinion, you know, the Article 36 of the Vienna Convention, of course, but we are signatory to the Vienna Convention. So it wasn't the prime, like, you know, a lot of things have been said, and I want to clarify, I want you to clarify that, you know, it wasn't the Prime Minister's choice to go to the ICJ. But once India had gone, we had to go, because we're a signatory.
Absolutely.
That is a fact, right?
Absolutely. Look, there's another question. There's a letter from March 29th of this year, where we've gone back and we've, you know, what we've done in that letter is actually narrowed down our acceptance. So the entire thing, the way it's been spun in the media, is unfortunate. Pakistan had accepted and Pakistan had ratified Vienna Convention and had gotten into the optional protocols. So therefore, there was no option for Pakistan to step out of it or not defend itself. It wouldn't have achieved anything. So as far as the Prime Minister is concerned, and I don't know why the Prime Minister's meeting with Sajjan Jindal is even brought up. I mean, are we saying that the judges of the ICJ were somehow influenced by the meeting
by
there?
India, we are saying. No?
Yes, and that's you know, this is the problem. I mean, if we had won, or I mean, if this had gone, and that was very unlikely that there wouldn't be a de facto stay order in this matter. Would we have said the same thing? You know, it's one of those things where you have to accept that these are the rules of the game, and you have to play, you know, with what you have. And we tried our best to question the jurisdiction question, and the prima facie there was jurisdiction, and they took it. So blaming the government in this respect is quite unfortunate, I think.
And now the argument really is whether the bilateral agreement between India and Pakistan overrides the Vienna Convention.
Exactly, and there too, let me sort of, you know, be the harbinger of bad news. I would imagine that they would find that no, it doesn't. You know, this is...
Why do you say so?
Well, because the Vienna Convention cannot be narrowed down by a state party.
Right.
You know, by a bilateral treaty, you can't actually narrow it down. Secondly, it's not been registered with the UN. So this was something that Mr. Harish Salve, the Indian lawyer, had pointed out. And I think this was a pretty unassailable argument, and that is what is going to come out of this.
But in your, what does the bilateral agreement actually say between Pakistan and India?
Yeah, the bilateral agreement essentially talks about consular access, but it says that there are certain cases where that would not be the case, where consular access would not be necessary, and spies or national security, etc., are in those exceptions. This is what the, you know, sort of the bilateral agreement of 2008.
And that is the reason why he wasn't provided the consular access.
Exactly, and that was our plea throughout.
Right.
Well, again, let me just say that, you know, we should have provided it and gotten over with it. You know.
That is how they tricked us. I think this was the way. If we could have provided it, the procedural requirement could have been completed, and they would not have taken up it for the interpretation of the ICJ.
Because India has said that, you know, there was some 16 times that they had requested for this consular access, and yet it wasn't given.
Actually, if you refer to the La Grande case, you will find that somehow the procedural problems create a chance for the state to take up it before the ICJ as a matter of interpretation and dispute between both of them. So they find an excuse for that.
But let me come back to you. In your opinion, Brigadier Saab, you know, we are being, a lot of people are also saying that, you know, the US opted out of the decision of the ICJ in the similar La Grande case, you're saying. But we are not the US, clearly. And, you know, like Yasser also pointed out, there are a lot of benefits for Pakistan in the future to the fact that, you know, India has brought in the ICJ for our future issues also. So how do you look at that from that point of view? You know, clearly we can say, you know, theoretically speaking and legally speaking, we can say today that, you know, we don't agree with the ICJ's jurisdiction. We're going to execute him anyway. But what does that gain for us if we do that? And what do we lose if we don't, in your opinion? How viable an option is it?
Well, I think it would be a great folly on our part to think that we can behave exactly the way that the US behaved, and that too many years back. Firstly, look at the US power and look at Pakistani position.
Right.
So I think it would be a wrong parallel to sort of just mimic what the US did. So we must also do, and if US could get away, we will also get away. That's not really the answer. Then I think the other thing is, I would say that we should now proceed with this case in a very legal way, prepare ourselves fully, and then of course we made a huge mistake by not giving him the consular access, because I was wondering as to what we would have really lost if we had given consular access. What could have happened? I don't understand. And in fact, we took a position. Firstly, it was untenable, and then it created complications for us. So I think when we take such like decisions, do we really sit down and work on them? And are there lessons for us for the future? Because, you know, such like things keep on happening in Pakistan, and we don't want to keep on repeating the crisis. What we see through, you know, looking at Pakistan for many years, and there is always, we are repeating the same crisis or a similar crisis. So, and this is the result of not taking decisions on the basis of institutional decisions are much more comprehensive. They take into account all sorts of angles, the legal angle, the political angle, the diplomatic angle, and then, you know, a decision is taken. So I would like to ask, you know, for our future betterment, that was this question of not giving legal access, access to what they call consular access to JADHAV, was it an one institution decision or a collective decision, and when was it taken and by whom was it taken?
Right. Yunus, in your opinion, it is, of course, we've also seen the fact that, the way the media has reacted to this whole, judgment, the way we have seen different people sit on different channels, comment on it without knowing exactly what it means for this order to come out, whether it had to come out, and a lot of irresponsible things have been said. We've also talked about the political parties and their take on this, and the fact that Jindal's visit to Pakistan was and meeting with the Prime Minister has been linked to it also. How has the Indian media played it? We keep on saying that like you said yourself, that we were tricked by the Indians, but it is certainly very, very important to look at it and look at the perspective with which they have looked at this whole issue, the way they have dealt with this whole issue on every forum, whether it's their media, whether it's their government, whether it's their legal team, whoever's handling the case with the counsel, with the lawyer in taking it in the ICJ also. In your opinion, what is the difference?
Actually, I'll delve a little deeper into it. We could not realize that how much important KULBHUSHAN JADHAV, who uses the passport of Mahrukh Hameed Patel, was for India.
Right.
So we actually miscalculated his importance. He was an asset for the Indian raw. So his 14 years of work in the Balochistan and the links he has established for the sabotage and terrorism here, it was very important for India to take him back. So they gave us very alarming signals also, but we could not take up because we didn't had any homework. Again, I would refer to the general's assessment that we failed to assess the situation either diplomatically, legally or politically. They had a high stakes and we also had high stakes, but they played it very ably, that they tried to make confusions. Otherwise, if you look at the case genuinely, if you look at the facts, you would find that he was a terrorist carrying a passport with another name, and
Right.
India is admitting that he is a naval officer, a serving officer.
Right, it's
So
quite
how
clear,
can,
right,
it
the
is very
facts
clear
are
and
quite
obvious.
clear.
So I think India, by going into the ICJ, even if they will legally, they would lose politically. So we Pakistani somehow have a paranoid situation here whenever it is dispute with India. It's just like the cricket match. We get obsessed with the win and lose situation very, very shortly. So I think even in this case, we should not be too much pessimistic. And even if India has taken this up with the ICJ, we can ably fight it with them.
Right.
And we have the clear facts. We have given the dossier to them. We are so hopeful. And the other thing, the political involvement of Pakistani parties, that is very important. So if they create a crisis out of nothing, then I think we would be having a very worst case scenario, because when you put pressure on the government internally, it is very hard for the government to fight the cases outside and externally. So instead of having a one-line position against the terrorism, and another thing, I think the ICJ is also caught between a dichotomic situation when at one side the United Nations and all of its agencies are working against the terrorism and the financing of terrorism. How can they come up with a judgment against the Pakistani court which has given a punishment and conviction to a terrorist,
Right,
a person who has confessed to his crimes? So I think the ICJ is also have to look at it more cautiously, because if they put a precedent in the international forum when a terrorist has been rescued by the ICJ, I
Right.
think that would be a very catastrophic situation for the multilateral relation between the members of the United Nations and between the bilateral relations between the regional situation. That will fuel the
situation between India
Indian
and
wishes to sabotage the Gwadar port, because the guy was in the Gwadar.
Right.
He has been sending his intelligence information to the RAW. So I think we are not losing the case on every area. It is just a legal complication, and just accepting the jurisdiction doesn't mean the judgment. So we are still on a very good grounds.
Right.
We should be, but we need a little bit responsible behavior, even if it is the nation or it is the leaders.
Right.
Yeah.
Yasser, in your opinion, how much, of course the ICJ is very overworked, and I'm sure it has its own time constraints. But in a case like this, how long do you think it can stretch? Clearly, there is no, I'm sure there's no time limit to what kind of a timeline are we looking at, in your opinion?
Well, I think they're not going to stretch it too long. So it's a matter of a few months at most.
But we did ask them for a certain, to decide by a certain time.
Well, that's because I think there's a 150-day thing with the. But let me start sort of. First of all, what can ICJ do?
Right.
It's not going to come up and sit in judgment over your judgment, right?
Right.
What they want is a fair shake, right? A fair shake for Mr. KULBHUSHAN Yadav, or Commander Jadhav, as one should call him, because our position is that he was an agent of RAW, and whereas the Indian position is completely untenable, if you think about it. The judgment itself is not going to, whatever the judgment comes from the ICJ is not going to actually affect our court system. What we have to do is give him a fair trial, as we should any person who's an accused person, right? And that is where I think
whether he's a terrorist or not.
Whether he's a terrorist or not, as long as he's a human being, he should get a fair trial. Should get fair trial. That's just that's just basic decency. That's what separates us from the uncivilized, right? That's why you have rule of law and you have a court system, is to give everyone fair trial, and that includes giving consular access. As long as we do that, I think the best thing, the tactical thing, or I would say the strategic thing to do would actually give him consular access right now.
But Yasser, doesn't the US also tread very, on thin ground as far as, treating terrorists in similar situations?
Absolutely, and the thing with US is it's a bully. It's in terms of power, in terms of its projection of power, it is a bully, and I think it's been criticized by a lot of human rights activists and human rights lawyers, and especially international lawyers who quite dislike the trampling of jurisdiction of ICJ by the US. So I think that is the case. We shouldn't follow the US example in international law.
And second, we are not the US.
And we are not the US, yes. And we just don't have the same kind of power projection. And unfortunately, this is the way of the world.
Right. But like you were saying earlier, what happens if we give consular access to Mr. Yadav now?
Well, I think one very big part of the case goes away.
Right.
Right. They wanted consular access. We gave him. Now we've taken him, and there can be a fair trial. We can make it as transparent as possible. There is an appeal. There's an appeals process. That appeal process should be followed. And then if he's found guilty, which he's already been found guilty, but if his guilt has been affirmed, then we can do whatever we. But
if we give him consular access now, we will have the trial again.
No.
Is that how it works?
No, that's not how.
Nothing. So what will happen if he gets consular access? Our own case, our own decision in the matter still stands.
It still stands.
Right.
And that's not. There's no way the ICJ can overturn that.
Right. And then, but the ICJ will then rule on, but then jurisdiction point as far as
the jurisdiction point, their main concern is the consular access and the denial of human rights that India has alleged. So long as we can ensure that the human rights of Mr. KULBHUSHAN Yadav were actually upheld by our court system, he was given a fair trial, which means adversarial court system with equal representation for both parties, the state and Mr. KULBHUSHAN Yadav. And that's where I find the attitude of some of the lawyer organizations to be very troubling.
Right.
The Lahore High Court Bar Association, I believe, passed a resolution saying that anyone who represents Jadhav would be turned out of the bar.
Would again be a terrorist type.
Yeah, exactly. And that is a very unfortunate way of looking at things. When Abraham Lincoln was assassinated, one of his closest confidants and colleagues was the person who actually represented one of the accused in the murder trial that followed. John Adams, who was one of the founding fathers of the US, appeared for British soldiers accused of attacking American civilians in 1773.
Right.
The sort of the calling of the bar, or the sort of the higher calling that a lawyer has, a lawyer can't deny a person who comes asking for help. And so we should have, our lawyers should extend maximum cooperation.
But Yasser, just to be fair, and I'll move on to General Saab after this, doesn't the bar, the Lahore bar, or lawyers generally, from time to time, don't we get some really difficult resolutions, or some really difficult opinions from their side also?
Absolutely. The kind of opinions that come out of it makes one wonder where the bar, what they're thinking. I mean, the sort of the position of the bar is to uphold the conscience of society and
the rule of law,
and constitution, and that they've failed to do repeatedly. I mean, this is one of those things which is such a disappointment for a lawyer like me who's working in Pakistan. I find the attitude of lawyers towards the idea of rule of law to be completely counterproductive. Completely counterproductive and completely against any norms of civilized justice that you can have, and that unfortunately is the case, and this is our cross to bear, sort of.
Right. And we hope that things will change. But my last question to you, General Saab, in your opinion, Yasser is saying that it's also the lawyers, but also it's also the media. We've been talking about that also. We haven't seen the kind of responsible journalism come out that we should have seen. As far as foreign affairs of the country, like we've earlier said, are concerned, there must be some things in a country that are sacrosanct, that are sacred for and not to be manipulated, not to be the subject of propaganda. But we don't see that here.
Yeah, of course, it's a reflection of their immaturity, and also that they are playing in the hands of people who have very deep vested interests. And there are people, there are also now actually media houses which represent a certain political group, and they are in opposition to the government, or they are in favor of the government. Actually, the media, we would have liked, most of the media should have been an independent media.
So they're not as unbiased as they're supposed to be.
Absolutely. And they should look at every problem in a very unbiased way and try to project it so that the people of Pakistan benefit from a media like this, from their opinion. But that is not what is happening. Actually, now what is happening is that you can switch on to a television network and you would know exactly what they would be saying about the government or what they would be saying about the opposition.
Because you know which side they represent.
So this is very unfortunate, and this is not what it should be. It should be on the merit of the case, on the basis of what individuals think, honestly. It may be, you could have different views.
Right,
that
certainly.
is perfectly all right, like you and I or everyone here could have different views. But it doesn't mean that these different views are meant in order to sort of advance, your personal and very limited agenda.
Right, no doubt. Thank you so much for joining me, General Saab. Thank you for joining me, Dr. Yunus Saab. Thank you for being with us, Yasser, and giving us your opinion. As far as this case, KULBHUSHAN Yadav's case is concerned, it's clearly a case in point for a kind of, for a kind of reflection for us to go back and think how we look at the affairs in our country, how responsible we are when reporting a certain event, how responsible we are when giving our opinion on it, our expertise on it, whether we are indeed experts on a matter or not. Let's reflect on that. Let's go towards a more responsible journalism, a more responsible form of politics, so that we can become a more responsible democracy. Thank you so much for joining me today on Perspective.
what exactly you want to achieve.
As you said, the origins of Australian literature rest in the United Kingdom, but the existence, the lived experience of Australians is very different from that of people in the United Kingdom.
Or the pure amongst the
Tent pegging is an equestrian sport practiced in many countries around the world. Wooden targets are placed on ground at a specific distance, and players wearing traditional dress and turban have to run their horses and try to hit the target and pick it up with a lance. Target missing is considered as a failure. Tent pegging is thought to have originated in the subcontinent. Historians say that mounted soldiers would gallop through enemy camps, removing the tent pegs with their lances and swords. They would be followed by more mounted soldiers who took advantage of the surprise and havoc caused by
out they are not working in accordance with the established norms of justice, maybe we can question them. Maybe we can talk about that, well, the justice is being denied to the other parties. And even we know that the judges were very competent. Look at the judgment itself about, you mentioned 547 or 48 pages.
Right.
It is, I think, enormous amount of written stuff available.